Welcome to Books on Air, the podcast that tells the story behind the book. It includes insights from authors about how they compose their work, what inspires them, and what they hope you'll take away from their book. Here's your host for this episode of Books on Air, Suzanne Harris.
Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Sloan Fremont, filling in for Suzanne Harris. This is a podcast where listeners get the secret story behind every book. Joining me today is Laura Tardino, author of the book Little Women Invest. This book is a simple financial guide for young women who don't actually work in finance, but want to learn a little bit more about how to invest and become rich. I think that's something we all want to know about. So Laura, I want to welcome you to the Books on Air podcast.
Yes, thank you. Good morning to everybody.
Yes. So let's start out by telling the audience just a little bit about yourself and what led you to write your book, Little Women Invest.
Yes, actually, I've always loved writing. And as I work in the financial sector since now 24 years, I thought that it's quite a long time, actually. In Italy, I'm Italian, so you may probably understand from my not so good English. Yes, so forgive me for that. But, there is a great need of financial education. I've always worked in this sector. And above all, among women, there is this need. So that I thought that it was the time for me to write a book, a financial guide to help women to get more used, to financial subjects. Of course, it was quite easy in the sense that, of course, when you work, for 24 years in the sector, then you can manage very easily the instruments and you know what to explain, which are the main issues when you invest money. And so that was the way that took me to write this book.
Yeah. And I mean, your experience, 24 years, that's a long time. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of different things in your experience. Yes. And I think this topic of, investing for women, and this is something I have talked about in previous lives and in other jobs that I've had and websites and things. But this, especially I think for young women, to start understanding this topic of finance early on in life. Right. And not waiting until they're older or waiting until they're married or waiting. It seems like young women, that was the message when I was growing up, like with my friends and even younger people I talk to now, it's like this message of waiting on something. And there's nothing to be waiting on, right? The time is now.
Yes, exactly.
To start taking action. And so,
yes. Sure.
Go ahead.
Yes, the point is exactly this one, because when you are young, you have more time, and time is the best friend for investments. So it's really very, very important that young women, because my focus was on women, because there is a huge need of financial education among women. I'm sure that it's the same in the US. I mean, this is a topic in Italy, in Europe. I'm sure, reading many surveys that is in the US as well. So if you start to get used to these themes, when you are young, and you start to invest your money, if you can save, your money when you are young, it's for sure better.
Yes. And so how does your book help women get started with being more comfortable and taking control of their finances?
Yes, I try in the book to teach them the basic notions, I would say, of finance, such as, for example, the instruments that you can use to build a portfolio. Let me say what is an equity, what is a bond, what kind of bond you can, buy. I mean, the corporate one, the government bond one, then which are the main characteristics and features of these instruments, because they are not exactly the same. And again, they are not thought to give you, the yield, the return in the same space of time. Okay. So it's really very, very important to understand, first of all, the instruments. And then another thing that is really very important is the approach. You must need, when you invest, that diversification is really very, very important. And as we have already said before, the time that, when we talk with financial people, it's called sometimes, time horizon. Okay, so I try to explain all these very basic notions in a very simple way, using the characters of this famous romance that was Little Women, and that's the reason why the book is titled Little Women Invest, just to, prepare them for a good conversation with a financial consultant, maybe, in order to start to invest their money. And the sooner, as we said before, the better.
Right. And yes, that tie-in with the book Little Women, I think, is such an interesting twist on the topic of finances and how, women reading your book can relate, because it sounds like you give them kind of the foundational understanding of, because that, I think, a lot of times women, young women, older women, whoever, feel like they don't understand, so they don't want to do anything, right?
Exactly.
Because of the lack of understanding. But it sounds like in your book, you give them that basic understanding while also tying it into the classic book Little Women. And I think that's such an interesting twist on the topic, because it takes, I think also a lot of times people think it's boring, or, it's something that is, as we said, something they can't understand. But tying it into that Little Women, the characters from Little Women, I think gives it such a unique spin that makes it more, maybe feel more actionable and interesting for people.
Yes, exactly. I thought that if I would have used, a book that is this famous romance with famous characters, like, for example, Marmee, Aunt March, the Four Sisters, using very, very simple, characters indeed, because of course they are recognized by, young women, because normally they read this book. The life of these women is a very simple life, even if very, very modern for the times. Probably it would be easier to get closer, the modern women to the finance. And in the book, I try to use the characters of Little Women just to explain the finance. Also because it's very interesting to use finance as, an instrument to get more women empowerment. Because ideally, yes, if you have a job, so you work and you have money and you can save and then invest your money, you have more chance to become more independent, empowered. And so, it's really very important for women, because nowadays, it's really very, very important to be independent, to be empowered. Okay. And this romance, Little Women, was indeed probably one of the first positive, I would say, manifesto of the women empowerment. That's the reason why I used this romance, using the characters to explain finance, just to get, women closer to finance itself. Because as you said at the beginning, if you know the subject, you can be more curious first, and you can start to invest. If you don't know anything, you are skeptical, you will never invest. So it's important to have basic knowledge of finance.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about balance, because I think as women, there's a lot to balance in our lives, right? With our families, our careers, and then even our own personal passions that drive us forward. How do you think women can balance all of these things and still be able to save for their future?
Yes, it's really very hard. For sure, my experience, because, I have this job in the financial sector that has probably, in Italy for sure, I don't know in the US, but I think we share many problems indeed. It's, a male sector. There are still many, many men. Women are increasing, but we are still a minority, I would say. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I have a job. I'm a mom with 2 sons. And it's very tough to balance everything. But I think that if you have a passion, whatever it is, it doesn't mind. And you transform that passion in your job. This is really very important. And as exactly, men have always done in their lives since, really, the Middle Ages and even before, if you transform your passions in a job and you get money for doing what you like, your passion, mm-hmm. This is the way that can take you to save money and to invest money. Of course, I don't, suggest to invest money that you borrow, okay? But mm-hmm. You have, of course, to have a job, to earn, and then to save. The next step after saving is investing, okay? Mm-hmm. Not leveraging any kind of borrowed money, okay? Right. So I think that you can balance everything. For sure, it's not easy because we take care of the family more than men on average, even if many things are changing, with the paternity leave, many modern, I would say, helps that today help actually, women in their career and in their job life. But you can manage, your passions. You should try to convey these passions in a job, okay? And with job, of course, you will get money and you can start to invest your money.
Right. And that what we touched on earlier with not waiting, not waiting for the perfect job or, the some certain age. As you were talking, that's what that reminds me of a lot of, as women, taking action, even if it's just with a little bit, like maybe you're not in your dream job right this second today as you're listening to this podcast, but taking some small amount of action where maybe you're investing, $25, $50, whatever it is, it sets up that behavior that helps lead you to success in the future. That's what I've found in my own life, at least.
Yes, indeed, it's like that. The discipline, if you start, with a small amount each month, no matter how much, depending, of course, on your salary, because if you earn a few, dollars, probably you can just save a few dollars, but it's fine. The important thing is to do that in a very disciplined way, every month, small amount. If you start, when you are really very young, when you arrive at your pension, at the retirement, actually, it will be a big amount. Mm-hmm. And with time, with a long horizon, above all, the equity investments, normally, they do really very well. So these make the difference in order to have, an income during the retirement period that allow to have, a good life. Because nowadays what is very difficult is to get a pension, even in countries like, for example, Italy or in general Europe, where there is a welfare, there is the public welfare. But of course, the countries that they have so much debt that it will be very difficult to have, a public pension that is enough for a good life. So you have to save your money, to invest your money, starting when you are young, even with very small amount each month in a very disciplined way. And when you will be older, you will have a lot of money. You will be rich. This is important.
Right. And that's one of the things we said at the very beginning of this interview, was that learning how to invest and become rich and have that security, I think, in that knowing that every action you take makes a difference, right? Because it can seem like it doesn't because it's such small amounts, but it matters. And especially as we talk about the time aspect of things, because if we wait 5 years to start, then we're 5 years behind where we could have been if we would have just started, today, for example.
Exactly. Time is really very, very important. I think that one of the most important ingredients that one must consider when decide, to invest the money. This is really very important. Mm-hmm. And, it's really very important in order to understand the difference in between the instruments that you can use. Because with an equity investment, you need probably more time to be, I would say, sure that you will get a return on that investment. With a fixed income one, you probably, in some case, you need less time. And it's a different investment because, you are lending your money to another company, to another, to a government, and that at a specific date you will get back that money, so it's different. The risk associated to this investment is of course different. Nothing is sure 100%, so we are risking in any case with equity and with bond, but the two investments are, different in terms of risk. And I try to explain why in the book.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and this is such a big topic. I know we could go on for hours about it, but just a couple of questions before we wrap up here today. What is one of your favorite lessons or stories from your book?
I think that probably very shortly, I have 3 stories, the main one. The first is that, as we said, to invest, we need money. So we need to work, earn, and then save, okay, before investing. This is very important. This is very important to do when we start to work. So even young, if we get a job young. The second lesson is that we need to know which is our, time horizon. Time is really very, very important, and which is the risk that we may face. This is really very important, which is the loss that actually we can afford. The third lesson is that it's really very important when we do an investment to diversify, not to invest all our money in the same asset, because it's too risky. Because if that asset goes, burst, defaulted, we lose everything. And this, it's better, that doesn't happen. Okay, so it's better to diversify. We have different instruments. We have equity, we have bond, we have, the currencies, we have what we call the commodities, and we have a kind of instruments that is called fund, okay? The so-called fund that is actually, already a product that offers this diversification in one product. So I try to explain all these instruments in a very, very simple way in the book.
Yes. And Laura, I mean, a ton of great information here. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. Before we close out, what do you hope the readers learn or take away after reading your book?
I think that, they will be ready for a good conversation with a financial consultant, because other suggestion advice that I give in the book is, of course, to avoid to do by themselves, okay? Mm-hmm. Above all, if they don't have, these young women, the right knowledge, okay? To avoid, to invest if they don't have the right knowledge, okay? Mm-hmm. And to, of course, use a financial consultant. This is really very important. So they will be ready to have a good conversation with this financial consultant in case, and discern probably, from good investments and bad investments.
Well, Laura, again, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's just been an amazing conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Sloan.
Laura Tardino is the author of the book, Little Women Invest, and you can find more about the book on Amazon, and I'll link to the book in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Sloan Fremont, and I hope you'll join us for the next Books on Air podcast. Remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for listening.